Now, the Buckeye Extra podcast with Rob Aller, Bill Rabinowitz, and Joey Kaufman from the Columbus Dispatch.
Welcome back to a Friday edition of the Buckeye Extra football podcast. It's August 16th. Ohio State is in the final days of preseason training camp. I'm Joey Kaufman, joined by Bill Rabinowitz. And Ryan Day delivered a bit of news on Thursday, and we're here to recap that. Ohio State has a starting quarterback. That starting quarterback is Will Howard, the transfer from Kansas State. I don't think it was a great surprise. That was the expectation all along. But it was interesting that he announced a starter as early as he did and before the Buckeyes held their second preseason scrimmage. Unusual for him based on past decisions, but nonetheless, it's a little over 2 weeks before the first game of the season against Akron, and the Buckeyes have a QB1 in place.
We could see the writing on the wall very early in training camp. We were able to watch the first four practices, and Will Howard seemed to take the first team reps in 11 on 11 drills like almost every time. And Devin Brown played well in the spring, and Will Howard struggled to some degree. Again, I've said this many times. That was to be expected. Everything was new for him. And they kind of read him the riot act and said, you got to lose some weight. You got to reshape your body, which he did. He dropped from 249 to 235-ish. And, the play that stands out to me from what we watched is that one run he had where he outran the secondary on a touchdown run. That was kind of two-hand touch, but still, I mean, you could see his speed. And he just kind of seemed like he was in command much more than he was in the spring. And so this, to me, always seemed a matter of when Ryan Day was going to announce it rather than if he was going to name Will Howard the quarterback.
Yeah, there was not a lot of other, I think, plausible options other than Will Howard. Devin Brown was the exception because he pushed Kyle McCord for the job a year ago. He nearly overtook McCord, which Ryan Day revealed yesterday.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting. That he was actually ahead of McCord. He said that's the first time he's ever said that, in fact, Devin Brown was ahead in that race.
Yeah, so I think it was certainly possible that Devin could have played well enough to win this job. I think just consistency has been maybe the issue for him. And when we saw it in practice, there were times where just it feels like he maybe misses some of the easy stuff. And there'll be the splash plays. We were there for the second spring practice where they end practice where he has this really pretty deep ball over the top to Bryson Rogers, but they don't need a quarterback to always be superhuman. They need somebody who can distribute the ball to playmakers, not make mistakes, convert on third down, even run on third down if coverage is tight, and you need somebody to pick up 4 yards. That's what Will Howard gives them. I think that's why he's the quarterback over Devin. But you look at the rest of the guys who were in this competition, it was really those two. There were three other freshmen on the roster with Julian Sand, Aaron Nolan, a true freshman as well. And then you have Lincoln Keenholz, who's been in the program for a year as a redshirt freshman. They were starting from behind. I think this competition was largely Will Howard and Devin Brown. And it seems like from the way people talked about Will Howard over the summer, he really made progress in gains there. And certainly in the first week of camp, he just looks like a mature quarterback who makes a lot of the right decisions.
And he's got a presence to him. We've talked to him a few times now. He just seems very at ease, very, quietly confident. I mean, he's not, I wouldn't say he's cocky at all or even like brash at all, but he just kind of has a presence. And I've covered teams a long time, and quarterbacks either have it or they don't in some ways that way. I mean, I think, CJ Stroud took a little for that to come out, but you could see it. Justin Fields, that was a different situation because he came during COVID essentially. And, that was just kind of a weird time. But I think of other quarterbacks they've had that just had a presence. JT Barrett had a presence about him. You just could tell that guys would rally around him. Cardell Jones in his way would be do the same thing. And I think Will Howard has that. I think that's a big key. I mean, I think Devin Brown does too. I think Devin Brown is an outwardly confident, almost brash guy. I don't think Will Howard's quite that way, but there is a presence to him. I think, he's been around the block. I don't think anything's going to faze him. I mean, last year, Kyle McCord, look, he's a smart guy. He's a good team guy. There's nothing wrong with Kyle McCord, but I don't think that anyone would say he had a great presence about him when you would just talk to him in an interview. Well-spoken guy, smart guy. but just never got the feel like he owned the team. Just never got that feel. And I could see that happening with Will Howard, that the guys would just, he's our guy, and there's no question about it.
The thing they brought up with McCord a lot last year was how steady he was. He didn't really flinch and pressure and all that, and could be kind of flatline. But I think that sort of works in both directions. Maybe it's okay in moments in games where you're trailing. They talked about this a lot after the Notre Dame comeback, where he didn't really get rattled, and that was a trait that was good in that situation. But sort of maybe the quarterback who has that intangible quality of getting guys sort of to rally around. I mean, whether it was going to be Will Howard or Devin Brown, both of them had that. I think just that feeling of maybe more moxie and presence and some of that.
Yeah, and we mentioned the other three. You mentioned the other three freshmen. I think that, I don't say clearly, but I think clearly, to me, that Julian Sand's the top of that group. We could see the way he throws the ball. He just has a beautiful release, nice, quick, fluid release. Will Howard's here for 1 year. Who knows what Devin Brown is thinking. He'll have a decision to make at the end of the year, whether he wants to stay and compete with Julian Sand for the job. Will Howard's going to be gone. But I think that next year, that'll be a very interesting battle if Devin Brown stays, between him and Julian Sand. And not to say that Lincoln Kienholz or Aaron Nolan couldn't make a push, but asking me right now in mid-August of 2024, I think Julian Sand could be the future quarterback at Ohio State sooner rather than later. But that's down the road. Right now, it's Will Howard, and I think it is good that they settle on it early. They don't have this dragging on into the season. Now you got really one spot that's open, the right guard spot, and even that seems to have getting a little closer to some clarity.
It will be interesting because they have potentially a lot of quarterbacks returning next year, or who can return and
right.
Be in the mix. And after Ryan Day announced Will Howard as the starting quarterback on Thursday, he went out to say that Devin Brown was number 2 on the depth chart, which is unusual for him because he doesn't always reveal who is the backup quarterback, at least publicly. He always says that's an open competition. It was, I think, notable that he made Devin the clear number 2. That maybe, I think, just due to his how close he was maybe in this competition and just sort of his status as a guy with 2 years in the program. But something to watch will just be where Julian makes a push, and because Ryan Day said he's certainly in the mix for that number 2 spot, and I think just who eventually, if Will Howard were to get hurt, who is Ohio State's short-term option, or who would be their long-term option there? And I think that's certainly something to watch, because the rest of the depth chart has some pretty interesting pieces for the long term, and sets the stage for whoever's in the competition next year.
Yeah. Let's talk a little more about Will Howard and what we think he brings to the offense. I mean, we know he can run. We know that he's experienced. To me, the big question was always, can he simply be an elite passer? Can he throw the ball well enough, accurately enough, deep enough, whatever? And in the spring, after the spring, that remained an open question to me, because I didn't see enough of him in the spring to think, yeah, he can make all of this. Nobody's expecting him to be CJ Stroud. I mean, that's just, that's not realistic, because they don't come along. But Kyle McCord threw a nice ball. I mean, I think about the out patterns that he could throw. I mean, he was really good at that. The arm was not the issue with Kyle McCord. And I just wondered, could Will Howard make those throws? And I think we saw that more in training camp. Now, the caveat is that the defense and the practices we saw really kind of dominated. So we didn't see a lot of receivers running free. We didn't see a lot of deep balls completed by anybody, because that's how good the defense is. But from what they were saying, first of all, the scrimmage on Saturday went well for the offense, and that he is making all the throws, and that he's putting them in tight windows and doing all the things that you have to do in the passing game. And to me, that's always been the big question with him.
Yeah, and we the glimpses of practice we saw, the last one we saw a week ago was when they had a couple of the starting offensive linemen out with illnesses, and they've recovered. And I think that's maybe stabilized thing up front, and certainly helps out the rest of the offense. From what we could see in the we watched 5 practices this year. I was impressed by Will Howard's footwork, his presence in the pocket, the way he could slide, and I think
Right.
that I think is different than with what we saw with McCord. Because remember, Day often brought up his footwork and how sometimes that was when he was playing well, it was because his feet were in tandem with his throwing motion, and when Kyle McCord had some setbacks late last year, it was because his footwork got out of place, and he did have the ankle injury last year as well. But that was a frequent thing that Ryan Day talked about, and I think we saw Will Howard's ability to slide in the pocket and kind of evade some of the rush, and maybe the offensive line situation was actually helpful for getting a glimpse of that trait with Will Howard. But I mean, I think it's a big asset of what he brings. Part of that, I think, is his athleticism, but I think it just also having a certain maturity and feel for things and being able to navigate the pocket. But that's going to be, I think, important as well for them this year. Because I mean, the offensive line is a question. I think they'll be better, but you're going to play. Hey, even if the offensive line is better, you're still going to play good teams with good pass rush, and you're going to need that.
Yeah, that's been an issue, not just with Kyle McCord, but I mean, like Justin Fields took a lot of sacks because as fast as he was and elusive as he was, sometimes he'd hold the ball too long and not feel the pressure. I think CJ Stroud, I don't think it was quite as pressing an issue, but I think that happened on occasion with him. So yeah, it's funny. And I think, well, Will Howard is mobile, but you think about like NFL quarterbacks who were not scramblers, but had that ability. Peyton Manning was very slow. Tom Brady, slow, but they had that ability to step up and around in the pocket and be able to get off the throws. And I think that's just a knack. I mean, I don't know how much you can teach that. That's just instincts and feeling it. And if you have that, which Will Howard apparently does, that's valuable.
Yeah, it will be a different stylistic quarterback than what Ohio State's had in recent years. I mean, I think what he brings with his running ability, and Bill, you mentioned what you want to see more from him as a passer. They will do different stuff with him, I imagine, than what they did with Kyle McCord and CJ, just because of his running ability and how they use him in the red zone, how they use him on third and short. I think will be really interesting to watch because he was much more of a willing runner at Kansas State than ever really Ohio State had since Justin Fields and maybe even since JT Barrett, but much different than certainly Kyle McCord, CJ Stroud, Dwayne Haskins. He's much more, I think, in the Fields, JT Barrett style or profile of a quarterback, and maybe that'll help out other areas of the offense, like the running game, and being able to equate numbers when they get into short yardage or goal line situations. I think will be revealing to watch. Maybe not week 1 against Akron, but eventually at some point down the line.
And he's a big guy, 6'4", I think, 6'4", 235. I mean, that's a big guy. And so if it's the 4th and 1 at the goal line, that's a real option. I mean, just run him up there and he'll overpower you. It's funny about the elusiveness of the quarterback or the ability to extend plays or make plays with their feet. I think Ryan Day watching J.J. McCarthy do that against his team the last several years was a big impetus for him to say, we need one of those. J.J. McCarthy and Will Howard are very different in body type. But how many times in the Michigan game last year do we see seemingly J.J. McCarthy in trouble and he got out of it and made a throw or made a run? It kept drives alive. I mean, it happened several times. And I think it's demoralizing for a defense when they do everything right. They put pressure on the quarterback. They have receivers covered, and the quarterback still makes a play. I think it's just demoralizing for a defense. And that's, I think, what Will Howard can help him do. Again, the question remains until he does it in games, can he be the guy who could also just light you up, just stand in the pocket and just light you up from the pocket? Because you need that too. And they say he can do it. He's been much better. And we're not going to find out against Akron. We're not going to find out against, probably until, Iowa, I would say. I mean, that's going to be a real test, because obviously Iowa's a great defense.
Yeah, I mean, if you're Ohio State, you want a guy who can make all the throws and have pinpoint accuracy and all that, because you have a really loaded group of wide receivers. Once again, you have Mecca returning. Carnell Tate, I think, is poised for a big year. And then, of course, there's There's Jeremiah Smith, the much hyped freshman who looks like he's in position to start based on all the first team reps he's gotten. You want somebody who can take advantage of those skill set and connect on the deep ball and have your explosive plays and all that. So that's a factor as well. Are you thinking about when you brought up JJ McCarthy and his ability to run? You look at Georgia as well. Stetson Bennett was somebody who could move. So
Yep.
some of the recent teams that have won it all in college football certainly have had quarterbacks who could move around and do some stuff with their legs. It doesn't always hold true, because you can go back to Alabama in 2020. That wasn't certainly Mac Jones' style. That was much more of a facilitator for their offense. But certainly, I think it adds some value. And I think Ohio State could use the ability that Howard has for the way he can extend plays, but just rejuvenating the run game, because that's been I think they have been so pass reliant in recent years. It's not often felt that they can sort of muster the needed 1 or 2, 3 yards to get a first down in some of those short yardage situations. Not been a great short yardage running team in recent years. And maybe Quinshon Judkins helps with that. Maybe an improved offensive line helps with that. But I think even just adding a quarterback who can keep the defense on its toes a little more helps with that as well.
Well, I also think Chip Kelly as the offensive coordinator helps that a lot.
Yeah.
I mean, he'll be able to design plays that will create the mismatches or create the openings. I mean, that's to me one of the more fascinating things that we're going to see this year is what difference does having Chip Kelly as the offensive coordinator instead of, well, Ryan Day was essentially the offensive coordinator last year. I mean, on top of everything else he had, I mean, it was his offense and he called the plays. And so it'll be fascinating to see what they do this year from an X's and O's perspective. And, I don't necessarily love digging into X's and O's because, I think it's in the weeds. But I think it'll be a fascinating thing this year to do that on certain occasions, just to expose and explain what they're doing and how they're doing it, because that's one of the reasons that Ryan Day hired him, is that he is really good at that stuff.
What maybe we'll touch on this last point before we wrap up. But what did you make of the decision that they made to name him the starter 16 days out before the opener? Because Justin Fields, I think you mentioned you thought it would be helpful, but Fields wasn't the guy until 12 days before. Stroud wasn't the guy until 12 days before the opener, and then obviously last year's went into the start of the season. And some of those, I mean, you could say last year it was hard for them to make a decision, but 5 years ago when it was Justin Fields against Gunnar Hogue and Chris Chugginoff, that felt like a slam dunk decision, and obviously that took longer than this one.
Well, I think part of it is you probably learned from that. There's just no need to drag it out when everyone knows. I mean, look, we all knew. This was not a surprise. It wasn't like I had a pre-written story, okay? I didn't have a pre-written story for Devin Brown being the guy. We'd have been in some trouble, to get something quickly, because we trust your eyes. That's kind of the longer I've done this, that's trust your eyes. Don't necessarily listen to what people say, because people have agendas when they talk. But trust your eyes. And so what I saw was Devin Brown was the guy. And it wasn't just me. I wasn't going out on a limb. I think everyone saw the same thing. I'm no genius. It was just kind of obvious. And so I think Ryan Day thought, why prolong the inevitable? I mean, why problem? And so he did. I think it's good for everybody. I'm sure Devin Brown's disappointed, but I think Devin Brown probably also saw the writing on the wall too. And so now you know. And as they've pointed out, Chip Kelly and Ryan Day, look, it's a long season. There's a really good chance, especially with the guy who can run, that you'll need a backup quarterback or two. I mean, they've already brought up Cardale Jones numerous times, the third stringer who gets thrust in and has to play. And so, if you're Devin Brown, you're probably disappointed. I hope you're disappointed, but it's not like you'll never see the light of day again. It's just be ready. And so that was not a surprise. Let's touch on a couple other things, I guess, quickly. I mentioned the right guard thing. He kind of hinted that Tegra Shabola is in the lead for that. It wasn't definitive by any means, and some of that is because some of these other guys have been out with the illness. But they are very happy with Tegra there. He's a tackle, natural tackle. But they did that with Paris Johnson a few years ago. Moved him inside. Played guard 1 year. It wasn't ideal. It's not ideal, but you could do it. And so I think if they were to play tomorrow, I think the center would be Seth McLaughlin, and I think the right guard would be Tegra Shabola. But I don't know. What was your take on that?
Yeah, I think Carson Hinsman's illness at the start of camp probably set him back. He was out for the first day of practice, then he was out again the following week. Probably put Tegra in a spot to where he could get a lot of those reps, and he's basically gotten most of it. Sound like most of the first team reps at right guard and practices so far. He's big. I mean, when you normally watch an offensive lineman, you can only read so much, take so much out of them hitting the blocking sled and some of their individual drills. But I mean, you notice his size. He's 6'6", 330 pounds.
Something?
I mean,
Yep.
he is massive.
Not quite DeJuan Jones, but he's in the ballpark.
Right. I mean, very few are like DeJuan Jones in terms of, but Tegra's as big as a lineman as you've seen it around Ohio State in the non-DeJuan Jones category in recent years. So I think they're gonna have a big line when you factor in him being in the interior.
Yeah,
it was telling too that they because they asked Ronnie was asked about this, whether he was basically their their third string tackle right now, where either Josh Simmons or Josh Fryer gets hurt, if they would put Tegra there. But it didn't sound like that was imminent because of the way he's playing at guard right now. They want to keep him there.
Did you notice, by the way, that I think it was Chip who referred to Josh Simmons as Jimmy again? Last year, they distinguished Josh Fryer from Josh Simmons by calling Josh Simmons Jimmy. And then that kind of like was a thing, and then it wasn't a thing. But I guess
because we started writing Jimmy in articles, and I don't think it's more like a nickname. I guess they call him to distinguish in position groups rather than he wants to be formally known as
right.
Jimmy for I guess that's the style ruling, the AP style ruling.
Yeah, and on defense, I mean, Jim Knowles said probably his biggest issue is backup safety, and I gotta ask the question if I know all coaches worry all the time, but if your biggest concern is backup safety, you got it pretty good, don't you? And I mean, you got a surplus of players at almost every position, except apparently safety. I mean, you look, they've got a pair and a spare, to use that expression, everywhere. And so I'm curious how the linebacker is going to play out in terms of, Cody Simon is the leader, the middle linebacker, essentially the Tommy Eichenberg of this year's team. And then you've got Sonny Styles and CJ Hicks, who are 5-star guys. And obviously Sonny Styles is one of their best 11. There's no doubt about that. But they play a 2 linebacker scheme most of the time. So how's that going to look? I mean, I don't know. So these aren't like even like issues or quite, they're just like, okay, what do you do? But it's not like a problem. You don't have any problems on defense. Now, injuries can certainly change that, and they have to play the way that they're supposed to play. But on paper, boy, oh boy.
Yeah, if as you said, if your main topic of concern in the middle of fall camp is your backup nickel safety, you are, I think, going to be in for a good year.
Yeah, we still don't know who the punter is. We don't know that. That's wide open.
Right, they're rolling guys for reps there.
Yeah, they have 3 guys, and
you know what they say about punter? If you have 3 punters, you have no punters.
Well, the way that people think about this team, they might not need a punter.
Right.
I think maybe at Akron, they might deliberately take a knee on 3rd down just to get somebody to punt.
Yeah,
you see that happening?
I still don't know if to me, this team is still clearly built on defense. Until we see Will Howard in more of a prolonged stretch against, I think, top shelf competition and see the upgrade in the offensive line. The way they ended last year, I don't think you could just probably take for granted that they're just going to become like it's 2022 all over again, where they are, or even 21, where they played Michigan State and scored a touchdown on every drive in the first half. And they have to show me something to get back to that level. So maybe they will need a punter, but they're going to be so tough to score on. I just think that they are still a team where it's their strength is the defense, and that is going to be, I think, what pushes them, I think, into the college football playoff, and it makes this team such a national title favorite, is because I don't know how you generate a bunch of explosive plays on them. I don't know. They were already one of the best defenses in the country last year, returned everybody, and then added 100 tackle guy from Alabama who was an All-American as a freshman in Caleb Downs. So I go figure I could score too many touchdowns against them.
Yeah. In terms of the offense, we should remember that the last time we saw these guys, they scored 3 points.
Yeah, that's why I sort of will hold off on fawning too much over that side of the ball. I think they'll be better. They have Chip Kelly. I think Will Howard will be a good quarterback for them. The offensive line should be better. But yeah, I mean, they were in jeopardy of it felt like they were going to have to win a game 3-0 in the Cotton Bowl.
Yeah, and they lost it 4-3. Yeah. And so, yeah, I mean, that's why I think the jury is still out a little bit on offense. I mean, clearly they're going to be better. I mean, that was a unique situation. They lost their quarterback and lost Devin Brown early, and poor Lincoln Keenholz had to play in that game. But the offensive line was terrible in that game, terrible. And so and those guys are mostly back. And so they've got a lot to prove. And that line, look, that's, to me, now that I think you more or less have the quarterback situation solved, we'll see. But, there's not a question about it anymore other than the performance. But the offensive line, the jury's still out. I mean, that's one where you say, prove it. I don't want to hear it. I want to see it. And we won't know that really again until Iowa. Michigan State is a Big Ten team, so you don't know, but they're not expected to be very, very good this year. The non-conference games are not going to be a challenge. It should not be a challenge, at least. And so Iowa will be a challenge, and then obviously Oregon will be a huge challenge. But the line is the key. I mean, that's the key.
That, I think, just about does it on this week's edition of the Buckeye Extra Football Podcast. That was Bill Rabinowitz. I'm Joey Kaufman. Thanks for listening to this latest episode of the podcast. And you can always find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or at the bottom of our stories at dispatch.com. Thanks, everybody.
Be sure and subscribe to the Buckeye Extra podcast in the iTunes Store, the Google Play Store, or on Stitcher.